Hi there, hello, my name's Lance, it's great to see you. Now today we're going to be continuing part 2 of what we did in part 1, which is how to draw the female figure. In part 1, we went over how to construct the body, going very specific with all the shapes, at different builds, bust sizes, etc. And now what we're going to be doing in part 2 is using that within context of a complete, full illustration, all the way from sketch to final colouring, line art, post-processing, everything. So if you're looking for how to do this, check in with part 1. If you want to see a speed paint of this within the context of a complete illustration, that's this one, part 2. Now after that's done, there will also be homework. So the homework sheet will be in the description, have a go at that, and then pop it in the Discord we've got, the link is also in the description, and show it to the other students and me. Also a word, we do have a Patreon, so if you like this video and want videos like it to happen more often or more reliably, consider becoming a member if that's something you can afford. Also, I want to say thank you to the fact that I have some patrons now. It's wonderful. It absolutely floored me. The support is amazing. I should probably read out the names of all the patrons since before there's too many of them, but I can't tell you how grateful I am. It's wonderful. Now, a quick word on the brushes. Same as last time, it's going to be my one custom brush, which is a blender at light pressure and a hard brown brush at heavy pressure, and then just a hard brown brush with 2 levels of smoothness, a pen tool for filling in gaps, and then just the regular blending brush. So there is only one brush that is custom. I will link that in the description as well. The rest of them are just standard brushes, and the custom brush is just a combination of 2 to save me using keyboard shortcuts because I'm lazy like that. Now, a little word on the composition for this image. Now since this one has to describe 2 characters top to toe, front on, it limits what composition I can do, but there are other options. So some of the more common ones you'll see is this one. This is the golden ratio. It's one of my favorite ones. It gives a really strong sense of movement within a frame without sending the viewer out of it. So it's a good way to gather someone into a focal point while letting them see the area of the image. So this one, for example, if we did like someone's upper body, we can draw the viewer up following that line of the body to the shoulder and then into the face, which is our final and most focal point. And you can see then if we put the lines over the top, that's where that flow of the image goes then. But there are other few options as well. So for instance, if you wanted something with less motion and you wanted to prioritize stability, you could use a center alignment. So that's where you would have everything aligned to the center where possible. You'll have a very stable image, it'll be a very sort of static image, and you won't do too much movement. You'll have visual flow up and down, but not sort of side to side. And then the one for this image, since we've got 2 characters, the most suitable would probably be using third lines. So this is where you put your focal points or your points of interest along those third lines, and points of particular interest where possible, you put them on the conjunction of third lines. So here I'm going to start on the sketch of the characters. It's going to be 2 characters. I want to make them fairly visually distinct from each other. So I'll make them different heights, and I'm also going to make them thematically different from each other. And I'll discuss that more as we get to it, but I want to show how this method can be used to construct characters with different builds. Now, once they're sort of starting up, you'll notice that I'm using different colors. This is during the sketch phase. The reason, and you'll have seen this in the previous video with the 2 blokes as well, that I'll use 2 different colors is when things are sketchy and you've just started your drawing, it can be a bit difficult to see what parts are one character and what parts are another character. So where you have multiple characters that are visually and sort of physically interacting, it can really help to do them in different colors so you can make it more distinct where one ends and one begins, and make it clearer where one goes behind the other and includes the other character. And so you'll also see I'm going for a slightly different sort of language of, as a sort of early point, of the pose. So the character on the left, the larger character, they're a much sort of more strong, aggressive kind of pose, whereas the character on the right is more slight and has a more sort of cutesy kind of pose that's less sort of aggressive. Now I'm just doing a rough face in here. I probably won't be keeping that. I just want it there for when I place all the features to make sure it balances out, because the face is going to be the biggest feature. So I want to make sure that the features are balancing out. Some elements that I'll probably keep or I'll tune it in. And again, with that contrast between the 2 characters. So where the character on the larger character, I've given them a slightly less feminine set of facial features. So the eyebrow sits a bit closer, the eyes are a bit narrower, and the shorter character, I've given them more feminine features. So I've given a softer nose to them, I've made the eyebrows more distant, Now I'm also going to contrast them in their build. So the larger character has slightly broader shoulders and a larger bust, whereas the smaller character is more slight. Now just getting a bit more detail in, and maybe like an eyebrow ring, just to make them look a bit more sort of rough. And then doing the physical interaction between the two busts there. That one can be a bit tricky, so I'm going to come back to that. If you're on a sort of tricky part of an image and it's not quite working out, have a go, work on something else, and come back. It's important not to get too sort of obsessed of getting one bit right. You'll just end up not getting it right and wasting a lot of time you could have used being productive on another part of the image or on another project entirely. Work on a few things at a time. And so now I'm deciding on the outfits. So for the larger character, I'm going to go with, maybe like a more angular shape language outfit, a more angular shape language face and teeth. And for the shorter character, I'm going to go for more rounded shape language. And this is a great way of making things visually distinct from each other, even if you're not going to cut them out from each other and put them in different scenes. You can still have them have a very different visual feel. One great example of this actually is the movie Wreck-It Ralph, where the film takes place in these 3 different worlds, each one's having a very clear shape language. So the movie starts in the game, which is all squares. That's Ralph's world. It's all made of squares. The shape language there is all squares. He then visits the modern shooter game. The shape language there is all triangles. Everything is triangular where possible. And then the bulk of the movie takes place in a kid's game where the shape language is all circles. So you still have a consistent aesthetic through the entire movie, but you can still have then a visually distinct location by having that shape language change. And that's what I'm doing here. So the larger character is going to have more angular outfit, maybe like black leather. They'll be more sort of aggressive, maybe more dominant. You could say like, maybe Dom for short. And then their hair sticks up and puffs out. Whereas here you can see I'm working on the hair for the smaller character, and I'm shaping everything down. Everything's moving downwards to give it a contrast of direction. And even the ears are more rounded. So they tilt down towards the edges as opposed to tilting up. And of course she doesn't have horns, that's another big difference. And then just doing a bit more shaping around then there, and using the existing construction shapes I have for building the chest to guide where I put the lines of the clothing. So in this case, I'm going to do the fantasy sort of wildly impractical outfit, and I'll be using maybe like a white fabric with gold trim, I'm thinking at this point, and then doing a plaited hair. So the hair's plaited down and constrained on that character. Now, and just a quick mention on how to draw curves more effectively. Now you'll notice that it's really easy to draw a curve if you're right-handed that arcs that direction. But drawing it the other way around can be quite tricky. One way around this is you can just flip the canvas to make it easy to do. If you're left-handed, same thing applies, other way around. Now, if you're working in traditional media, you can still do it, just rotate the paper 180 degrees for the same net effect. So try to do curves where it's easiest for your hand, and you get much smoother and more reliable shapes. And then here, doing the hand, remembering if you do have a tricky hand pose to do, one of the things you've always got with you is your hand. So you can use your own hand for a reference for most poses. Some you can't do sort of in front of you, you might have to do in a mirror, but it always works. And if you need your opposite hand, you can just flip the image. And now I'm drawing the idea of the staff. I want a sort of big, magic staffs have a big gem ball thing on the end. And then drawing in some shaping of where the elbows are behind the characters there. And drawing the fingers there. Now, the hand there wasn't really working off the bat. I wasn't loving how it felt. So you'll notice I put a little asterisk next to that hand. That's something you can do yourself as well. So when you've been drawing something for a while and it's just not working, it's not clicking, and you don't know what the issue is. But you come back to it after an hour or two, or maybe the following day, or maybe just in 10 minutes, and you can immediately see what the issue is. So if you're having trouble with a part of the image, mark that with a little asterisk so you remember to come back to it. Work on something else, another part of the image, another image entirely, have a cup of tea, and then come back to it with fresh eyes. Now on the plaits as well, I had someone while I was streaming this ask how I do plaits. So I used to do plaits that looked really accurate. They were a zigzag and the things flowed one side to the other. Now I just do a series of onions with a pointy bit on the bottom of it and just sort of detail it out with hair strands, and it looks fine. So if you notice my work, I save a bit of time doing that. It is not as accurate, but it is significantly faster, and no one seems to notice. So with that then, I'm having another red hot go at that hand, and I still don't love it, so I've walked away and done something else. And I'm just grabbing sections of the hair to sort of give it a bit of a curve in, to again reinforce that rounded shape language. Everything about the shorter character is about being rounded, is about going down and being rounded. And then I'm doing the sketching for the shape of the staff, and just flipping canvas basically constantly to make sure it's symmetrical. And then coming back here and trying to work on this bit where there's the busts are meeting in the middle, remembering that the larger one will have more mass, so more mass means that it will affect the smaller one more, so it's going to sort of win the fight, as it were. Now with that, that's basically the sketch of the characters done, and it's time to move on then to the sketch for the background. Now a quick word on how to do mountains and more organic shapes. So you'll notice the top one there does not look like mountains, but the bottom one does. It's still 3 very simple triangles. The difference is the bottom one has a bit of overlap, they're all different sizes and they're all different distances. Having a mechanical repetition of shape will make things look inorganic. Your mountains will not look like mountains, your strands of hair will not look like strands of hair, they'll look like sawtooth blades. So it's important with anything, hair, mountains, etc., that you want to look organic, avoid repetition, avoid repeating shapes. So now with that squared away, I've got my sort of mountaintop scene sketched in. I'm going to start on the line art. Now with the line art, I've had a couple of people again ask when I may be doing a line art tutorial. Very soon, I promise. Current roadmap is do the basics of figure drawing, so bodies, heads, hands, hair, clothes, and then move on to how to draw things that are part of character illustration that are not the characters. So that would be things like perspective and a few other just parts of building an image. Then we'll get onto specialist things like tool specifics, so things like how to do inking. Mine is very straightforward. Mine is just hard round brush, maximum smoothing, do all the lines in, and then after that I do a second pass to give the line extra weight in certain places in lines with where you would put ambient occlusion. So where you would get those deep shadows from ambient occlusion in soft light. There are literally an infinite number of valid ways to do a line art. That's just the way I do it. And I will, once I can get this out of the way in the next few videos, I will go into a few different ways of doing that. Like for instance, there's the excellent French artist Mobius, who he describes directed light using line art, which is absolutely fantastic. And now just getting a bit more detail on the clothing. You'll notice when I'm doing the clothing, I'll only really do folds for something this tight around those little crease points. Now with tight clothing, it is actually more important to have some clothing creases and clothing seams. The reason being is that very, very tight clothes can just look like plasticine or paint if you don't give them detail in the few opportunities you have to give them detail. So a big bellowing cloak, plenty of opportunity to make it sort of fold and flow and flutter easy. But something really tight, you still need it to look like a different material, but you have less opportunity. So you have to be more deliberate with your opportunities in showing clothing or showing fabric in that. So you'll notice there's those little bumps behind the ankle or behind the knee where the clothing would have a crease where it's being compressed there. And so I'm just going over and now starting to ink the shorter character. Again, going for much sort of softer shape language and much more down and flowy. And just getting that jawline right there. Normally I'll have a few more goes at the jawline. I was very lucky there. I'm quite grateful for that. And then going over, giving a bit of a smug, sort of cheeky expression. So where one is sort of brash and aggressive, this one's kind of sly. And then getting that skin dentation bulge there on the upper arm. It's important to introduce physicality anywhere you can in an image because the viewer can't touch what is in the picture. But you have an opportunity to communicate that physical presence by things like the skin dentation on things they are wearing or what they are leaning on. Any way you can find a way to physically have an object be changed through or moved through interaction, that's an opportunity you need to take. Now here, I was doing this one and someone was asking why I don't use the symmetry tool for things like the staff. Now I won't use the symmetry tool for figure drawing, it's absolute poison, and I'm probably going to make a video about it and put it as one of the big sort of artwork killers, just like, you know, Tracing and Christopher Hart. They're one of the big ones. And so one of the reasons why it can never really work within the context of an illustration is because it is perfect. And what I mean by that, it is mechanically perfect. I can never draw something that is mechanically precise in its symmetry. What that means is no matter how good the rest of the image is, it will never have a level of mechanical symmetry. It will always have organic levels of symmetry, which will not be perfect, but it will not be out of place. So that's one of the reasons why using the symmetry tool, it's something that I feel doesn't have a place. Now here I've gone and colored the base line art. Now the reason I've done that is it helps me and you the viewer see where I'm putting that extra bit of black to do the ambient occlusion. Now I'll merge these two together once I'm done, but it's a good way of checking to make sure I've added that extra bit of line weighting around the whole image. So where it would be occluded, those darkest little spots that no light reaches, and then going over and doing the darker spots, like things like the extra bit of black for the eyeline, for the eyelash. And then also the little bits around the staff and all the detailing around what I guess passes for clothes. And that's basically got all of those there. So once that's done, I can then start dropping in my flats. Now one thing you'll notice is that when you're working over white, it feels like you're working over nothing, but you're actually not. A white page is really overpowering. It has a very strong presence. So for instance, with the skin of the larger girl, I thought that the green was relatively understated. But once I put the rest of the image in, I realized it was too bright green, but it had just been overpowered by the background that I couldn't really notice it. And you'll also see sort of the reverse. So I want her to be in a black leather outfit, which it will look black, but the leather outfit she has now looks like a dark sort of brown color. And then the same thing with a shorter character. I wanted her to have pale skin and white for what clothing she is wearing. Now you'll see here when I do the flat color, it actually looks like a tan color. It is white, it only looks like tan because it's next to pure white. And next to pure white, anything but pure white will look like a color or look like a gray. So you can also work on not pure white, you can work on like a mid-tone gray if you prefer, just so you don't have that overpowering presence there, making it hard to pick those colors, because pure white is very overpowering and makes it difficult. Now here I've dropped a green layer under my flats, just to let me see all the bits where I've missed a bit of flat coloring, and just tuning in the eyes there on the larger girl, and just grabbing color. And this is where I mentioned in the brush I use that hard pen tool. This is what I use the hard pen tool for, just filling in gaps because it has no soft edge to it. So it's really good for when I use the flat colors to make my selections, because I use my flat colors to inform how my magic wand works. So I can just select from any layer and it'll just refer back to my flat colors layer. And now that I've done the flats for the characters, I know visually where they will block in, and I can start then blocking in the background. So here I'm doing just those little mountain things that are poking around from the little platform they're on, and then using a gradient to just drop a simple sort of sky box there. And then doing just some clouds as well. Easy way to do clouds, they're just sort of blobs, sort of balls that are sort of merged together. And then you do a bit of shadow on top when you do the shading that just has the same shape language again. And then with that basic bit blocked in, I can then do like something to frame the faces, to really pull focus towards the faces of the characters. Because again, with a composition like this, it's the full body, so it's kind of static, kind of still. So I want to make as much movement and pop as I can within that, front-facing up and down two characters' full body. So that's where I'm going to put like a moon or a sun or something behind them. And now I'm just detailing in the rocks. Again, I don't have to add too much detail, and I don't want to add too much detail to the background. The background shouldn't pull attention away from the focus of the image. So I'm just doing some very simple shapes here so that it still looks like the place, so it gives the image contextualization through having a background in there. But the background isn't so attention-getting that it pulls the viewer's attention off of the characters, which is the point of the illustration. So with that in there, I can then start moving on to doing some shading. Now, I just do a shading layer, which is a multiply layer on top of my flats. But one thing I do is, you'll notice with a multiply layer, if you have the same color over a light color and the same color over a dark color, with the way multiply works, it may overpower the light areas and it may undershade the dark areas. So one thing you can do, and I'll do this later, you'll see here, is I'll make a copy of the flats layer. I will clip it to my shading layer and I will set it to brightness. What that means is it will only show up where my shading layer shows up because it's clipped to it, and it will only affect the brightness. It will affect no other part of it. It'll just take the brightness of it. So it means that, for instance, with the shading of the black outfit there, since the flats are black, it will make the shading black or darker. It will give it more dark information. It won't change the color. But for instance, where I'm shading over the white fabric of the smaller girl, it will have a lighter level on that shading. So it's a good way of saving yourself a step of getting the shading lighter or darker to control that. And so now I'm just following those construction shapes. Like I said, the pizza slices that go around from the bottom of the pelvis up to the corner, that's how you mark where the hip bones will be. So that's what those construction shapes are for. So they're still also worth visualizing, even if you don't have them visible. Those shapes are there not just for making the basic outline, but they also inform the shading later on. So you see that spot of shading that comes out then from the crotch of the taller girl. That's that same line we drew in part 1 from the knee up towards the hip. Those are those muscles that connect from the knee to parts of the pelvis. And then just tuning some of that shading in there. This is with that the blending tool or with that brush that does blending at light pressure. And then doing a more hard shading then. And you can see here, now that I've put a copy of the flats and linked it, my multiply layer on dark things like the horns and outfit will come out much darker and it'll be much more pronounced. And so here I've just done some basic little shapes to imply a lot of detail. I don't want to do all the detail on the horns. I'll do a few chunks here and there, and the viewer will do the rest. You can trust the viewer to do a lot of things, and they will fill in a lot of detail for you if you start them off. And then doing a sort of big rounded bit of shading on the bust there, but then a harder bit of shading under it for the cast shadow. So now I'll move on to like one of the more sort of shiny areas of the leathery vinyl outfit. Now, leathery vinyl, it is something some people have some trouble with. Interestingly, it is a lot easier than just regular shading of cloth because of how it behaves. Like the shinier it is, the easier it becomes. That's something I'll do a mini tutorial on later on. But at a basic, what you do is essentially you map out some very simple shading, maybe even just some ambient occlusion and one or two hard shadows like under the knee there. And then you'll do most of the description of shape with the highlight layer that comes next. But for now, I'm just describing a few of those creases in the fabric and giving a bit more of description to those seams, so the lines where the fabric is sewn together. And where the folds and seams are all I'm really concentrating on here. So you can see I've got that seam coming from the inner thigh there, down the calf, and doing a nice big drop shadow, a big sort of surface plane shadow there for the knee, just to really shape that. And so then I'm not going to be shading the inside of the little cape waist thing. This is something that one of my excellent peers pointed out. So that one was something I probably should have caught sooner, but you can see it's actually still quite easy to fix late in the game. So grab it, move it, and then just tidy it up, and you're out the door in a minute or two. So you can see I'm not shading the inside of that capelet. I'm actually going to make it paler and bluer. So the reason for that is as things get further away with the background, they'll get paler and bluer. Now you can do that with a sort of macro sense on a character. It's not something like you won't get atmospheric perspective on something that's a couple of inches between the neck and the back of the hair in real life, but you can do it in an illustration. And so here now I'm just doing a bit of detailing on the staff, so basic shading and then I'm just messing up the shape a little bit, sort of like I did with the horns there, just doing little dents and scratches in and dents and scratches out. And so then doing on the gold. Gold and metallic shapes can be challenging, but you, interestingly, can get away with a lot, honestly, because one of the things about them that makes them look the way they do is they are reflective. So that means that they're not showing light and dark in the same way as just an object that is a matte finish and is shaded. They're more acting like a mirror. So the surface facing down may actually be the brightest surface, and the surface facing up may be the darkest surface, because maybe they're below something dark. And since a lot of depictions of metal objects will be of a reflection of what's in front of them, because you, the viewer, are in front of them, the viewer can't see what it is that they are supposed to be reflecting. So as long as you get the shapes largely correct, you can get away with a lot. This is the reason why when you see a jewelry catalogue, it's always worth looking to see if you can find the picture of a man wearing a black t-shirt with a beard, because that's the photographer, and he will have a difficult time taking photographs of jewelry without appearing in the photo, because they're all mirror finishes. Or at least it used to be the case. So now, just doing a bit of shading on the head and the hair there for the smaller character. And I'm going to tune the colors, because you can see the shadings coming out a bit sort of a flesh tone on that white fabric. And that's not quite the right hue, so I'm going to adjust that later. But for now, I just want to block in, get all the shading right, and then I'll fix the colors later as part of something else. And catching any little drop shadows that I can. So a little drop shadow of the strap across there. Anytime you get an opportunity to use a drop shadow, take it. If you have an excuse to do a drop shadow, take it. Drop shadows are a great way to add depth to a character or to an illustration without having to have really complicated shading. They're an easy way to get a lot of depth and a lot of shape quickly. That's why you'll notice if you watch anime, that's most of the shading they do is drop shadows. Whereas more subtle shading, like for instance this bit of shading under the navel here, that one needed a lot more control and a lot more subtlety to work. And it doesn't present as much immediate depth. It's something I wanted to do because I quite like the shapes there, so I put that effort in, but you'll notice you're getting a lot more depth from the shadows, you know, on the larger girl on there. You'll get a lot more around her pelvis there, or around the feet. You can see the 1 foot being completely in shadow is giving it a lot more depth than all these detailed shadows around the ankle. So make them your priority and find excuses to do drop shadows where you can, because they're great. And so just going in and doing some of the finer bits now. Largely the shading is squared away at this point. It's all mostly done. I'm just doing a bit more then on the shiny objects, because they'll behave a bit differently. Now with crystals and gems, they're fairly similar in behavior to chrome surfaces, because they are shiny as well, with the difference then that they will let some light in and then bounce it around and bring it out, as opposed to chrome and gold surfaces that just bounce everything off like a mirror. There'll be a level on top of the basic bounce of light, and then you might want to have more sort of complicated objects. So I wanted the staff here to have like a sort of swirling stuff going on inside it. Again, the shading is a bit of a dull color there, but I'm going to be tuning that later, because I can just, you can see there, I can grab whatever layers I want, select it based on my flats, and then just use a hue saturation adjustment to get it to wherever I need it to be. And then once I've got the sort of the mixed up shape, I'm going to shade the top with a very soft brush and get it rid of a bit on the bottom with a really soft brush, just so it's got that still detail, but also a clear hierarchy of dark to light. And then doing a lot of these shapes with the lasso tool, because the lasso tool is a great way to get a really hard edged shine, because it's got that perfect sort of edge to it. You'll see people use that a lot in webcomics as well, because it's just a really quick way to do shading. And then adding a bit of shadow underneath them to sort of integrate them into the background there, so they sort of merge with it better, so they're combined better with it. And with that, I'm just checking over to make sure all the bits are good. And I've realized that I've got to do a bit more shading on the jewels on the quote-unquote clothing. And with that then, that's a lot of those done. So I'm tuning some of the shadows in, and I've added another layer to control the color of the shading. So I'm using another copy of the flats, and that way I can use that to tune those colors. And now I'm going over and just doing a secondary bit of shading. for the darkest spots. You won't use this very much, but having it there for those darkest spots gives you a lot of depth. Even if you barely do it, like you'll do some in the armpit, you'll do some under the chin, but you won't do very much, but the bits you do really do make a difference with the overall level of depth on the character. And so then just adding a bit of those darkest bits, like the bits of the butt that you can see from the front, under the knee there to make that point more sort of pronounced, and then around the ankle there, because the other thing is when you've got an area that's fully shaded like that back leg there, when you want to shade it anymore, you're already taken it as far as the first shading layer will go, so that second layer is really good for that as well. You'll notice that I did that on the calf of the larger of the two blokes in the previous video as well. I use my secondary shading layer as a way of shaping the things that are already in shadow. And here I'm just getting some red and adding a bit of skin tone variation, because skin's not just plastic, you want to add some. Now you can add, if someone's got a different color skin, maybe add a darker version of that color. I still find that in funny colored, like, you know, greens and bright blue characters, that your red for blush still works. I guess, you know, we as people expect blush to be red, and when we see it as another color, it kind of works, but red, I guess, reads more viscerally. Now here I'm just doing the shines on the skin. Remember to break up the shine on the skin and not do like a big inorganic one. Since skin is textured, you don't want to do a big circular shine, because that makes it look like glassy plastic. Do some little bits of shine and break it up a bit, so you can communicate that it's not a perfectly even surface. It's got that physical, tactile texture of skin. And then doing the same shine then on things like the jewels, and just, this is the reverse of that. This is a big round, hard-edged shine. And then on the eyes, that gives it a really glassy look, having a hard edge to it. Now here's where I talked about, that we get back to before, with doing the shine on the vinyl and leather. So vinyl and leather, similar to chrome, is defined a lot by its reflectiveness, by how reflective it is. So you'll do, like what can really help, and it's a really easy way to approach it, is a big sort of ridge of light down it. Sort of like you're doing a highlight down the side of a soft drink can. And then once you've done that, you then break it up, make it crease and crumple, where you can see on the elbow where it creases and crumples the fabric. You then, you know, zigzag and crease and crumple that highlight. And so then the same thing will be true for the legs and the boots there. So for them, I'll use the lasso tool, and I'll sort of have it be straight, but then you notice it gets more zigzaggy as it gets closer to things like the knee or below the knee, where the fabric would be folding. That neat, smooth highlight as it goes down the smooth shape is going to be broken up and go zigzaggy and be more irregular. So be straight where it's like an even area, but then let it be more jagged when you get to an area that's less so. And so using the same method to do the highlights on the staff there. You can pen these in. I use the lasso tool and then just the big soft brush, just because it's a much quicker way to approach it. And this illustration probably took a minute or two. So I wanted to get this one done so I could get the video and get the content out for you guys to have a look at, and so we could discuss it. And so now this is that bit of where there would not honestly be atmospheric perspective, but you can do it. You'll notice this a lot in Japanese illustrations. They'll do a little bit behind the hair, and you'll notice that the atmospheric perspective does send it back. It does look like it's got some distance on it. It doesn't make sense that there's blue light coming from under the back of their neck. And the reason it works visually is it uses the same rules as atmospheric perspective. It's just one of those things. It looks nice. I like it personally, so I use it to give a bit of distance. Now here I've put just a very subtle bit of skin tone showing through the white of the outfit there, and then I've also gone over and deleted some of it to make a sort of lace pattern there. It's a very subtle effect, but I quite like it. And now I'm coloring the line art by getting a copy of, getting the line art and making a layer on top, and then having that be like a color on top. That lets me control what color line art is. And now I've made a big blue layer on top of just the characters that's set to multiply. So this, and then I delete some of it out around the rim, and that gives me that lovely sort of backlighting effect. That was looking a little bit too cold. I might be a bit too reserved with how I apply big bits of tone to a figure. I always sort of like to keep all my detail. I'm a bit precious with it. So it's a thing that you should probably be braver than I am with, because I tend to tone it down too much. I lose the impact of it. My concern with this one was that once I had darkened the image with that overlay of blue, that it then made the figures into a mid-tone range, which sort of merged them with the background, so the background didn't pop as much. And so now I'm going to go over and maybe make the background elements a bit brighter to compensate for that. So I'm going to give the moon a bit of a glow. So on top of everything, I'll do like a layer there with a bit of glow to it, and I'll also do a bit to the top of things like the clouds. So that will let me have a bit of a sort of a feeling of ambient light around everything. And so there, I'm getting towards basically the end of the image here. This is probably around just before what we would call post-processing, where I'm doing just a lot of checking, getting light levels right, getting the tone right, just really sort of tuning it in before I finish it up. And so first thing I'll do then is when I'm post-processing is I'll use levels adjustment to sort of bake the image like that. I'll then blur that, and then I'll set it to screen. So I'll duplicate the whole thing, levels adjustment, blur, put on top, and I can maybe make that more subtle. Now here is gradient overlay. So I'll get a gradient map, overlay it, set it to color, and the last one then is a way of getting a bit of sort of hierarchy of color. So normal layer, big soft brush, some yellow on top, and some blues below, and then I'll set that to overlay. And again, I'll make it fairly subtle. A fairly strong look to that can look kind of good. It's a bit surreal, but it's a good way of getting a hierarchy of what's lit and what's not, and sort of cooling your shadows and warming your highlights. And then just making those shadows in the background a bit more pronounced to make them show up a bit more. Now, I don't have a gradient selection tool in Clip Studio, so I just make a gradient layer, select everything with that layer, and then I now use that as my selection to blur out the background more the further it is towards the bottom. And so that's our final illustration. So we've got both our characters, a fairly engaging composition, they're thematically contrasting, and we've introduced lighting to it, and all this is built on what we talked about in part 1, which is that construction of the body, which you can see adapts to different body types. So that's that one squared away. Now, if you like what you see and you want to have a go, I've got some homework sheets you can do. Pop them in the Discord and share them with the other students there. A lot of people already have, and it's been absolutely wonderful to see. And if you like this video, want to see more like it, like I said before, consider becoming a member on Patreon. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you in the next one. You have a good day. Bye.